to liberate all sentient beings as infinite as space. Please give rise to the supreme and precious bodhicitta. Today we begin the teaching on the Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. As you are all aware, the Heart Sutra is highly revered across all schools of Tibetan Buddhism, such as the Gelug, the Sakya, the Kagyu, and the Nyingma, the four major lineages, as well as the Jonang and all other traditions. It is held in great importance. In fact, everyone includes it in their collection of daily recitations. Whether during morning and evening prayers or at other times, it is frequently chanted. For every Dharma teacher, it is an indispensable scripture in their regular spiritual practice. Regarding the Han region's Buddhist tradition, you should also know that in any monastery, including the Pure Land, Zen and Tiantai schools, and many other lineages, the Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra is a text universally practiced by all. Years ago at the Academy, I gave a teaching on the Heart Sutra. There weren't many people back then. How many of those Dharma friends are still here? I am not entirely sure, because all of society is impermanent. The students are impermanent, and the teacher is impermanent. Everything is constantly shifting and changing. In the Han region's Buddhist tradition, monasteries and eminent masters place great value on it. Especially within the Mahayana tradition, it is universally respected. Even in the Theravada traditions of Thailand and Sri Lanka, they chant the Heart Sutra now. Historically, the Tibetan version of the Heart Sutra has only one translation. However, commentaries on the Heart Sutra are quite numerous in the Tibetan tradition. Among the Tibetan canonical works, the Kangyur contains the Buddha's words. Commentaries by eminent masters explaining the sutras are called Shastras. In the Shastras, there are about 8 commentaries. In the Tibetan areas, masters like Taranatha and Rongten of the Jonang school, among many others, have provided extensive explanations. In particular, when King Trizong Detsen at one point in his practice had made some progress, he started to become arrogant. The famous Tibetan translator Vairotsana then explained the Heart Sutra through the lens of the Tantric teachings. He presented this commentary to the king. This Shastra still exists in Tibetan historical records today. Thus, it is very widespread in Tibetan Buddhism. Among the commentaries by Indian masters, the one by the Tantric master Vimalamitra is notably comprehensive. It is clear that the Indian Panditas also took the Heart Sutra very seriously. Of course, Han Buddhist commentaries are extremely numerous. Some are called handbooks, while others are formal exegeses. We have works by Master Yuanying, Master Oyi, and many other great masters. Some modern scholars of the Heart Sutra believe that in the Han Buddhist tradition, those who have researched or explained the text number around 100. Such a claim exists. I believe the Heart Sutra is one of the most widely circulated scriptures in the Buddhist world. Although Master Xuanzang's translation is only about 260 characters, very short compared to the Diamond Sutra, which has 5,000 characters, it seems brief. The word count may be small, but the entirety of the Buddha's teachings can be condensed within the Heart Sutra. It is like how much can be compressed into one point. With modern scientific progress, incredible amounts of information can be compressed into a tiny piece of software or a file. Similarly, all 84,000 Dharma gates of Shakyamuni Buddha are contained within the 3 turnings of the Wheel of Dharma. Ultimately, these 3 turnings are encapsulated in the 2nd turning. The 2nd turning, in turn, is contained within the Prajnaparamita Sutras. There are the extensive, middle and short versions. The extensive Prajnaparamita has 100,000 stanzas, the middle has 25,000 stanzas, and the short version has 8,000 stanzas. The essence of these is the verse summary of Prajnaparamita. Condensed even further, it becomes the Heart Sutra. Thus, the Heart Sutra is a complete scripture. Some wonder why it doesn't begin with the phrase, "Thus have I heard," nor end with the standard conclusion, "Devas, humans and Rakshas rejoiced, upheld it and praised it." Since it lacks the usual prologue, some argue the Heart Sutra isn't a complete sutra. That claim is made by some, but it is entirely incorrect. In the Han region, for instance, there are about 7 different translations. There is Kumara Jiva's version and Xuanzang's version. Among these 7 different versions, regardless of the country, the most widely used version is the one translated by Xuanzang, although the opening line, "Thus have I heard," and what follows are not included in his version, and the closing section is also absent. It remains the most widely circulated. Most people can recite this version by heart. Why use this particular version? Personally speaking, I have great confidence in this version, even though it differs from some Tibetan versions and from many Chinese versions as well. Several versions of the Heart Sutra do exist, such as those that include the opening, "Thus have I heard," and the closing dissemination section, which some refer to as the concluding portion. But Xuanzang's Heart Sutra carries the greatest blessing power. Around 1994, when we visited the Han region, we found within the Chanlong Tripitaka a version of the Heart Sutra identical to the Tibetan. Yet I feel that today, among Chinese speakers, those who chant the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra all use Xuanzang's version. And it's not just China. When His Holiness visited the United States, many Buddhist practitioners there who chant the Heart Sutra were also using Xuanzang's translation. When His Holiness visited Singapore and attended a large national ceremony, the Heart Sutra was displayed on a large screen, and the version they used was also the short Heart Sutra that we commonly recite today. So to practice and chant using the shorter Heart Sutra is entirely appropriate. So at this point you should all understand that what we call the Heart Sutra contains the entirety of the Buddha Shakyamuni's teachings on emptiness, all condensed within this brief scripture. As Shakyamuni Buddha approached parinirvana, he placed great importance on the Prajnaparamita Sutras. He said to his disciple Ananda, "It matters not if all my other teachings fade away, but it would be best if the Prajnaparamita Sutras are never lost or destroyed, for they are the most precious treasure in this world." He entrusted this with great care. Therefore, studying and reflecting on the Heart Sutra is truly worthwhile, especially on this occasion. Why are we studying Xuanzang's version of the Heart Sutra? You should all have some sense of this. The Heart Sutra has spread so widely throughout the Han region, and there is a whole history behind that. Of course, many of the episodes in Journey to the West are based on the historical account of Xuanzang's journey to the West in search of the scriptures. And Journey to the West contains a great deal of mythology, so compared to the actual historical record of Xuanzang's pilgrimage, the author took creative liberties and embellished many parts of the story, so there are portions of it that we as Buddhists would not take as reliable. However, generally speaking, reliable history records it this way. When Tang Xuanzang set out for India to seek the scriptures, he started with a large group of people. But as he drew closer to India, Xuanzang found himself without any companions or help. At that time, in a monastery along the way, he encountered someone weeping loudly. When he went to check, he found a man suffering from a severe illness, much like what we now call leprosy. His entire body was covered in sores. Xuanzang was on a very tight schedule, but seeing how pitiable this monk was, he did not continue his journey. He stayed at the monastery to treat the man. Finally, when the man had mostly recovered, he gave Xuanzang a Sanskrit scripture. It was the Heart Sutra. Our current Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra is that very same Sanskrit text. From then on, Xuanzang recited it throughout his journey. Whenever he faced obstacles or found himself in difficulty, he would chant this sutra, and the obstacles would immediately vanish. Once on the banks of the Ganges, he saw a gathering of several thousand people ahead. Out of curiosity, he went to see what was happening. It turned out to be a group of Brahmanic non-Buddhists. At that time, India had 96 schools of non-Buddhists. Among the Brahmanic followers, some had high realizations, others lower, and some even engaged in very savage rituals. This particular sect was very influential. They believed the river was home to a deity. To appease the river god, it was their tradition to sacrifice a youth by throwing them into the water every year. That was their custom. That day they had just captured someone to be thrown into the river. The victim had a family who were clinging to him in deep agony. Just then, a foreigner arrived. It was Tang Xuanzang. They were overjoyed and immediately prepared to throw Xuanzang into the river. The family of the person who had been captured before had Xuanzang bound up, and Xuanzang said, "Today you've tied me up and are going to throw me in the river as an offering to your river deity. There is nothing I can do about that. But I have one request, and you must grant it." They asked, "What is your request?" He said, "As a monastic I must finish reciting my daily scriptures. Once I have finished, you may do with me as you please." They felt this was not an unreasonable request, and agreed. After he had chanted the Heart Sutra 3 times, the sky suddenly changed, thunder rumbled, and the weather shifted dramatically and completely. At that moment, everyone was seized with fear. They felt this was a man they could not afford to offend, and they released Xuanzang immediately. Throughout Xuanzang's journey in search of the scriptures, he faced countless dangers and hardships like this, and all of them were overcome through the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra. So in general, this tradition exists in Chinese Buddhism as well. Elder monastics and senior practitioners would all know this. When earthquakes strike or hardships arise, people turn to the Heart Sutra and begin chanting. Tibetan Buddhism has this practice as well. When obstacles arise, especially on the 29th day of the 12th lunar month each year, they often chant the Heart Sutra as a repelling practice, aspiring that in the coming year no negative forces or harmful influences will come to destroy or harm them, and that all harm be dispelled through the power of emptiness in the Heart Sutra. There are also similar accounts in the scriptural teachings. When Indra was once threatened by Mara, he contemplated emptiness and chanted the Heart Sutra, and after doing so he was able to pass through the danger completely. So whether we carry the Heart Sutra with us, keep it in our shrine room, or at night when we sleep, place it under our pillow, nightmares and adverse conditions can all be cleared away through the power of Prajnaparamita, the blessing force of Prajnaparamita emptiness. Blessing is power. Some people ask, what exactly does blessing mean? Some people think blessing means adding something to eat, like adding a snack. But the blessing of the Heart Sutra is simply the power of the Heart Sutra, and this power, there are so many things our naked eyes simply cannot see. Medicine has its power, electricity has its power, everything has its own kind of power, its own kind of force. In the same way, the blessing of the Heart Sutra, those of us who practice the Dharma understand the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra carries the blessing of the power of emptiness, the blessing of the Buddha's power, and the blessing of ultimate truth. Add to that the blessing of our own faith, and when we hold that faith and all these conditions come together, harmful forces and obstacles will surely be dispelled. I imagine many people chant the Heart Sutra every day. It takes less than a minute to finish, and yet there are practitioners who find it a bit of a challenge to chant it even once a day. That does happen too. Chanting the Heart Sutra 3 times a day, though, should be no problem at all. After I've given these teachings, I hope that when you chant, it comes from your own willingness. Forcing yourself to chant doesn't work either. The Dharma is not a set of rigid dogmas, it is not compulsory. It should be that once you understand the benefit and merit, you embrace it of your own accord. I think this point is also very important. I think those who have set everything aside and wholeheartedly dedicated themselves to practice should chant it. This time when I traveled south and visited several other places, I taught the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra several times. When teaching outside, I don't have the capacity to give empowerments or Dharma transmissions, so when the occasion allows, teaching the Heart Sutra carries tremendous merit through emptiness. Even in groups outside that don't follow Buddhism at all, teaching the Heart Sutra still resonates well in ordinary language. People are quite receptive to it. In any case, there are groups in society that aren't genuine Buddhist communities, and yet they hold the view that even without fully understanding the Heart Sutra's content, every morning before work begins, all the staff line up and recite the Heart Sutra together and then begin their work. They do this every single day. There are groups like this in Yunnan. Although I didn't have any prepared notes this time, I had previously studied the teachings and historical accounts of eminent masters, so I was able to offer them a brief teaching on the side. So why did I announce I would teach the Heart Sutra upon returning this time? Partly because I wanted to take it easy, no books to read, no lesson plans to prepare. But on the other hand, here at the Academy, we have some very capable Dharma teachers who have never taught the Heart Sutra here, and if asked to teach it outside, they might not be able to. And if they can't, people will laugh at us. A great Dharma teacher from the world-renowned Sutta 5 Sciences Buddhist Academy, and they can't even teach the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra, then what right do you have to teach Madhyamaka? After all, the Heart Sutra is the very essence of Madhyamaka. That would not reflect well on us. So let's take our time and study the Heart Sutra together. Alright, that's about as far as we'll go for today.
Banzang Padma Sodargye Bandhangara Padma Sodargye Bandhangara Padma Sodargye